There's a plant growing right now that produces more food than tomatoes, not slightly more, but 10 times more across its lifetime. It grows food year-round in moderate climates, while tomatoes give you one season. The harvest lasts 6 months sitting on your counter without any canning or freezing needed. You plant it once and walk away. It keeps producing for 20 to 30 years. No replanting, no starting over. Every single nursery across America used to stock it. Farmers everywhere grew it. Government agricultural offices pushed it hard as critical for feeding families and communities. And then something impossible happened. Within less than 2 decades, it vanished so completely from American gardens that most people under 50 have never even heard its name. This wasn't a failure. The plant works perfectly. Something better didn't come along. What happened was deliberate, intentional. Someone, somewhere, decided this plant was too dangerous to let people know about. If you're watching this on Nature's Forgotten World, don't forget to hit that subscribe button right now. We uncover stories the mainstream ignores. Plus, smash that like button. It helps me bring you more of this kind of content. Let's dive in. A plant that produces year-round food for decades from one planting breaks the entire industrial food machine. Think about it. Seed companies rely on selling seeds to you every single spring. If people planted once and harvested for 20 years, those companies lose customers forever. Grocery store chains depend on you coming back weekly to buy produce. If you're harvesting abundance from your own yard year-round, you're not standing in their aisles. Garden centers are built on the model of selling you new plants and seeds every spring. A customer who plants once and never comes back represents lost revenue. The entire system of annual gardening, the buying cycle, the replanting tradition, it all collapses when people realize perennial alternatives exist and actually outperform traditional crops in almost every way. This is the untold story of how a superior plant was systematically erased from public knowledge, how an entire industry worked to bury it, and why you've never heard of it, even though your great-grandparents probably knew exactly what it was. Let me take you back to 1943. My uncle's farm stretched across rural Tennessee. He showed me an old photograph, black and white, the edges worn and soft. It captured a woman standing beside a plant that towered over her head. The branches hung heavy with hundreds, maybe thousands of small round fruits covering nearly every inch. That woman was his mother, my great-aunt. That tree, she explained, was what she called her food tree. The fruits looked like tomatoes, but longer, shaped more like ovals, colored deep orange-red, hanging down in thick clusters from the branches. "How tall did this tree grow?" I asked. 12 feet tall, she said. It produced food for 18 straight years until a brutal freeze winter finally killed it. We lived off that single plant almost all year long. We made sauce, we dried them, we stored fresh ones in the root cellar downstairs. One plant fed our entire family and gave vegetables to the neighbors, too. We never planted a new one. We just kept harvesting from the same tree year after year. When I asked what happened to the tree tomatoes after that, she looked at me strange, like I was asking about something from an ancient civilization. "They stopped selling them after the war ended," she said simply. "Nobody wanted them anymore. Everybody switched to regular tomatoes, the hybrid kinds, the ones you had to buy and replant every spring. I don't even know why everyone moved away from the tree tomatoes. They were superior in every way." The plant she was describing, this mystery tree from her memory, is scientifically known as Siphomander batacea. Most people call it Tamarillo. Some regions call it tree tomato. It originated in South America, high in the Andes Mountains, but arrived in North America during the late 1800s. By the 1920s and 30s, it was thriving everywhere. California grew it, Florida cultivated vast plantings, southern states all adopted it. Government agricultural extension services actively promoted it as the superior choice when compared to regular annual tomatoes. Then it vanished. Not from the world, it didn't stop existing. People in New Zealand still grow it commercially. South America kept cultivating it. Parts of Australia produce it. But it disappeared from American consciousness and American agriculture almost completely. Today, go ask average Americans about Tamarillo, and they'll either never have heard the word or assume it's some exotic tropical fruit that only grows in distant countries. All of that is completely false. Let me show you exactly what Tamarillo is and what makes it so remarkable. Tamarillo grows as a fast-developing perennial shrub or small tree. Within just 2 to 3 years, it reaches 8 to 12 feet tall. The leaves are big and shaped like hearts. It produces clusters of fruits that look like eggs or small ovals. Each fruit measures about 2 to 3 inches in length. The appearance resembles elongated tomatoes with smooth, thin skin. Depending on the variety you choose, the color ranges across red, orange, or golden yellow tones. The flavor is distinct and complex, tart and slightly sweet simultaneously, with undertones that hint at tomato combined with passion fruit flavors. It's not identical to a tomato, but you use it in similar ways. You can eat them fresh, straight from the tree, though they are quite tart. Simply peel back the thin skin and slice the inner flesh. Drop them into salads, mix them into sauces, add them to sauces, cook them down into reductions. They shine in sauce recipes, making excellent chutneys and jams. You can dry them completely and keep them for months. You can store the fresh fruit in cool conditions for 4 to 6 months. That is the critical distinction. A regular tomato stays fresh for a handful of days, maybe 2 weeks if you're fortunate. Tamarillo fruits last for months, half a year in the right storage conditions. That alone changes everything about food planning and security. Production numbers tell the real story here. When a Tamarillo plant reaches maturity, it produces 50 to 100 pounds of usable fruit annually. In optimal growing conditions, some plants yield as much as 150 pounds per year. A plant doesn't start producing until its second year after planting. By the third year, you get complete harvests. Then the plant keeps producing for 20 to 30 years. Do the actual math. One plant generating 50 to 100 pounds yearly for 20 to 30 years equals something between 1,000 and 3,000 total pounds of food from that single planting. Now compare that to tomatoes. A tomato plant generates 10 to 30 pounds in one growing season. Then it dies. You replant the following spring. Over a 20-year period, assuming you replant annually and average 25 pounds per plant, that one location gives you 500 pounds total. One Tamarillo generates 2 to 6 times more food from identical space across the same time frame. You only planted once instead of planting 20 separate times. But the advantages extend far beyond simple numbers. Tamarillos in moderate climates produce continuously throughout the entire year, not confined to one harvest window. In subtropical regions, they fruit mainly during fall and winter months when tomatoes sit dormant and produce nothing. This creates fresh, nutritious fruit during seasons when nothing else grows. In truly tropical zones, fruiting happens all year continuously. Even in cooler climate regions where there aren't completely perennial, they generate fruit across longer seasons than tomatoes ever could. In California's Central Valley, before Tamarillos were largely forgotten, they produced fruit from July straight through December, 5 continuous months. Compare that to the brief tomato season. Once Tamarillo plants become established, they require remarkably little maintenance. Water them regularly while they're young and developing. After that initial period, they need minimal water. Pests barely bother them. Disease is uncommon compared to tomatoes, which constantly battle fungal problems, blights, and pest invasions. You don't stake Tamarillos. You don't tie them to supports. Pruning isn't necessary, though light pruning can increase production and help control the size. You plant them, you water them while they establish themselves, then they simply produce for 3 decades straight. Now think about tomato requirements. Annual replanting needed, constant staking required, consistent watering schedules mandatory, pest management ongoing, disease problems persistent. It's a labor-intensive operation that demands your attention constantly for lower total production. So the logical question becomes, why would any gardener choose tomatoes over Tamarillos? Sometimes it's familiarity with the taste. Sometimes it's personal flavor preference. Sometimes it's what you grew up eating. But honestly, most people choose tomatoes because Tamarillos disappeared before most of them ever got the chance to try them and compare the two directly. During the 1930s and 40s, Tamarillos were gaining momentum and popularity. Government extension agents promoted them actively. Garden centers and nurseries stocked and sold them. Home gardeners planted them. They became particularly trendy during victory gardens in the Second World War because they produced abundantly without requiring lots of work or inputs. This was the golden age for Tamarillo in America. But the moment the war ended, several significant events happened at roughly the same time that destroyed Tamarillo cultivation across the entire United States. The first major shift involved industrial agriculture and suburban sprawl accelerating rapidly. The farming model transformed completely toward annual crops, hybrid seed systems, and chemical fertilizer dependence. Perennial food plants didn't align with this new model. You cannot sell annual seed packets for perennial plants that don't need replanting. You cannot market fertilizers and pesticides to plants that thrive with minimal chemical inputs. Tamarillos were too independent, too self-sufficient, too disconnected from the commercial system. They made people too autonomous. The second crushing blow came when the tomato industry exploded with investment and promotion. Hybrid tomatoes were being developed through deliberate breeding programs. Scientists created varieties specifically designed for disease resistance, uniform ripening across all fruits, and durability during shipping across long distances. The industry poured enormous resources into tomato breeding and marketing campaigns. Meanwhile, Tamarillos received zero industry investment. They were incompatible with industrial agriculture. They don't travel well in shipment. They're perennial, making them impossible to fit into annual crop cycles and seasonal business models. The tomato industry had no motivation to promote an alternative that would reduce their own sales and profits. A superior competitor threatened their entire market dominance. The third factor involved changing suburban culture and aesthetic values. The new cultural ideal emphasized annual flower gardens and seasonal vegetable gardens. Perennial food plants looked too agricultural, too rural, too much like a farm rather than a manicured suburban landscape. Tamarillos are small trees, significant woody plants. They don't fit into raised bed garden systems. They don't align with the annual replanting cycle that garden centers and nurseries depend on for consistent year-round revenue. A customer who plants a Tamarillo and harvests from it for 20 years becomes a customer that garden centers lose permanently. They won't return in spring to buy tomato transplants. They won't purchase seeds every planting season. Their gardening becomes independent and self-sufficient. The fourth reason involved a dramatic shift in agricultural extension services and government agricultural focus. Following the war, extension offices increasingly directed their resources and attention towards supporting commercial agriculture operations, not home food production by individual families. Tamarillos never became a commercial crop in the United States. There was no supporting infrastructure. Therefore, extension services stopped promoting them. Without institutional support and education, knowledge about growing Tamarillos gradually disappeared. The practical skills and experience faded from public consciousness. A generation passed, and the information was essentially lost. The fifth and final factor involved brutal weather events during the 1950s and 1960s. Tamarillos are frost-sensitive plants. They tolerate light frost without damage. Hard freezes kill them to the ground. During this period, the coldest winters in decades struck California and southern states hard. The extreme temperatures killed established Tamarillo plants across entire regions. People didn't replant them afterward. Nurseries stopped carrying them because customer demand had evaporated. Within a single generation, Tamarillos transformed from common and widespread to essentially forgotten and unknown. The plant disappeared from American memory. centers and grocery store chains profit most directly from your annual dependence and repeated purchasing. That's not coincidence. That's not accident. That's pattern. Now, let me show you exactly how to cultivate tamarillos, because they still exist and are available. Seeds come from specialty suppliers. Plant material can be ordered through internet retailers. They're not difficult to grow in appropriate climates. Tamarillos need frost-free or nearly frost-free conditions to survive long-term. They tolerate temperatures down to approximately 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Light frost won't kill them. Hard freezes will destroy them completely. This means they grow as perennials in USDA zones 9 through 11. That includes parts of California, regions of Florida, Gulf Coast areas, southern Arizona, and parts of Texas. In colder zones, you can grow them in large containers and bring them inside during winter months, or grow them as annuals, though that eliminates the main benefit of their perennial nature. Plant tamarillos in full sun or partial shade. They prefer soil that drains well but tolerate various soil types and conditions. Space plants about 6 to 8 feet apart because they grow quickly and expand substantially. Water regularly while they're establishing themselves. Once established, they tolerate dry conditions reasonably well, though production improves with consistent moisture availability. Tamarillos begin producing fruit during the second year after planting. By year 3, you harvest full production. Pick fruits when they're fully colored and slightly soft when you press them gently. Don't pull them off the branches. This damages the plant. Cut the stem carefully instead. Fruit stores at cool room temperature for weeks to months depending on storage conditions. You can freeze them, make them into sauce or jam, dry them completely for storage. Prune lightly to shape the plant and remove dead branches. Heavy pruning reduces production but also controls the overall size. Fertilize occasionally with balanced organic fertilizer. They don't need heavy feeding. Watch for aphids occasionally, though pests are minimal. Disease is rare compared to tomatoes. The biggest challenge in marginal climates is protecting plants from extreme cold. In Zone 8 or colder parts of Zone 9, where hard freezes occasionally strike, you'll need to protect plants or accept that brutal cold might kill them. Mulch heavily around the base. Cover plants during freeze warnings. Plant in protected locations near buildings or under tree canopy. But in appropriate climates, tamarillos are actually easier to grow than tomatoes and dramatically more productive over time. One plant, 20 to 30 years of continuous production, 50 to 100 pounds annually, minimal maintenance required. That's real food security. That's resilience. That's what annual tomatoes cannot provide. So why don't more people grow tamarillos today? Because most don't know they exist. Because nurseries stopped selling them years ago. Because gardening media never covers them. Because the entire system remains designed to sell annual seeds and plants, not promote perennial alternatives that reduce future sales. And because once knowledge is suppressed, reviving it is genuinely difficult. But knowledge is returning. Small specialty seed companies are beginning to offer tamarillo seeds again. Specialty nurseries are propagating plants. Permaculture enthusiasts and food forest designers are actively rediscovering perennial fruits. People are realizing that the annual replanting model is unsustainable. Replanting every year, buying seeds every spring, depending on complex supply chains that break easily. It's all fragile. Perennial food plants are resilient. Plant once and harvest for decades. That's what Tamarillo represents, an alternative path. And here's the bigger picture. Tamarillo isn't unique. Dozens of perennial fruits and vegetables were once common and are now completely forgotten. Plants that produce more food with less work than annual crops. Plants that were buried for identical reasons because they make people too independent, too self-sufficient, too disconnected from the commercial food system. Reviving these plants means challenging the system. It means rejecting the story that annual replanting is normal. It means recognizing that industrial agriculture's model isn't actually about efficiency or productivity. It's about dependence. It's about recurring sales. It's about customers coming back repeatedly. Perennial food plants break that model entirely, and that's precisely why they were suppressed. Don't forget to share this video with anyone interested in gardening, food security, or forgotten history. Subscribe to Nature's Forgotten World for more stories like this. Comment below and tell me, would you grow a Tamarillo if you could? That engagement helps me reach more people with this important information. If you're in zones 9 through 11, plant a Tamarillo. If you're in zone 8, try one in a protected location or large container indoors. Learn how to grow it. Experience what it feels like to harvest from the same plant year after year, then share that knowledge with others. Give cuttings to neighbors. Tamarillos root easily from cuttings. Tell people what you're growing. Break the silence that keeps these plants invisible and forgotten. Every person who plants a Tamarillo and harvests from it for 20 years is one person who stops buying tomato plants every spring. That's one lost customer for garden centers. One person growing their own food year-round instead of depending on grocery stores. Multiply that by thousands or millions, and you see exactly why these plants were buried. They work too well. They make people too independent. The plant superior to tomatoes is Tamarillo. It produces food year-round in moderate climates. It stores for 6 months without any special processing. It never requires replanting. One plant, decades of harvests. They buried it so completely that you forgot it existed. Now you know. Now you can choose to revive what was lost. You can plant perennial food security instead of repeating annual dependence. You can become the kind of person who harvests from the same plant for 20 years. You can break free from the system that depends on your annual purchases. On Nature's Forgotten World, we believe the most important stories are the ones suppressed. They're the ones that matter most. Make this different. Choose differently. Plant Tamarillo. Share this story. Subscribe to Nature's Forgotten World. The knowledge is coming back. It starts with you.